apologize. To set this in context, we have considerable challenges in dealing with environmental effects of marine and hydrokinetics. First of all, these are new technologies we're dealing with. We're going into a new ocean space where there are already many existing uses, and most of the stressors that will occur to marine animals and habitats are fairly unknown. So coupled with this, there are very few data available to really determine the potential effects. And what data are available from other industries and from other countries will be appropriate, but perhaps not of complete use. However, on the good side, there is starting to be some scientific literature out that directly addresses these interactions, particularly out of Europe. However, in the meantime, we need to be able to predict the risks of marine receptors with these incomplete data, and we need to organize those data that exist in order to move forward, okay? And we are doing this by developing two systems. The first, looking at risk assessment, we call our Environmental Risk Evaluation System, or ESRI, and our knowledge management for data organizing called TISA. Next.
Oops.
Next.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the purpose and use of ESRI and TISA, what we are trying to do is classify and evaluate environmental effects of marine and hydrokinetic development, but to do this specifically in support of siting and permitting. ESRIs will help determine the highest risk, and we see this not as a decision system, but rather a point of departure for discussions between developers and regulators in moving.
Andrea, can I just stop you 1 second?
Sure.
Could everybody, all the presenters put their mics or their phones on mute?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're having a little trouble hearing. Sorry.
Okay, great.
Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you. I was having trouble hearing myself. Thank you very much.
All right, sorry. Go ahead,
okay,
Andrea.
So, thanks. So the purpose of ESRIs is to determine the highest risks between stressor and receptor interactions as a point of departure for discussions between developers and regulators. This will also allow regulators or developers to help optimize the siting to reduce risk, and will provide guidance up front for developers to modify either their design or operations to target the specific risks. And this will all lead towards cost-effective mitigation strategies for those risks. The purpose of TISA is to make data available. It will serve as a platform both for ESRIs and other risk assessment, but much more broadly as a portal for use to share data and access data across all the sectors. Our stance is that all data in TISA is publicly available unless there's a good reason why it's not, like proprietary data. And finally, it will act as an archive for a whole range of supporting materials, specific scientific publications, videos, slides, etc. Next. Okay, this cartoon, many of you have probably seen before. This is just simply our thought piece, especially going back to the ESA report days. What are all the potential interactions that could happen with these devices? Blade strike, chemical leaching, EMF, acoustics, all these kinds of things that could happen. But what we're trying to get to is which are the ones that are the most probable, most likely, therefore the highest risk. Next. So risk is a term we all use. We use it in different ways. We use risk to be those scenarios or sequence of events that cause adverse outcomes. And if you look at this slide, the two gray bubbles further down make up the two aspects of risk. First of all, the likelihood or probability of an adverse, of a bad outcome of something happening, and the degree of impact or the consequence of that happening. And what I'm going to show you today is largely our analysis of consequence, because probability modeling requires, it's a mathematical process that requires a lot of data. I'll speak to that briefly, but unfortunately, in most cases, we simply don't have those data available yet. Next. Go ahead and click through these, Scott. So ESRIs considers the interaction of stressors and receptors, a stressor being any part of an MHK system that provides stress on the environment, a receptor being a marine animal, a habitat, an ecosystem process. We take a case study approach, that is real projects going on in the U.S. that are either proposed or under development. The idea being if we do enough of these cases, we will really begin to span that analytical space and be able to have predictive power over what specific stressor-receptor interactions are likely to be. We have 3 cases initially, one tidal, one wave, and one river. And we have ranked these stressor-receptor interactions using a set of biophysical risk factors I'm not going to go into for time's sake. Go ahead and click, yeah. So our assumptions. The point of ARIES is to have actionable information that will help determine the highest risk. Now, you may show a high risk due to biophysical factors for two reasons. One is it really is a high risk. The second is simply high uncertainty, as Anna mentioned. And until we can reduce that uncertainty through monitoring data, research, etc., we can't discard those potential interactions as high risks. I just want a little nuance, but biophysical risk factors allow us to scientifically rank the highest risks for a receptor group, say marine mammals, which is what presents the highest risk, acoustics, EMFs, blade strike. But we can't go across receptor groups. We can't say that a risk to a mammal is greater than a risk to a fish or an oyster. However, we societally have developed regulations that reflect our values and allow us to rank across those receptors. We have determined through regulation whether we protect marine mammals more than we protect crabs or sediments. And we have applied, what we have done is we have applied these biophysical risk factors, if you will, the scientific side of things, and we've applied regulatory risk factors. And it's a multi-step process, which I won't go into here. Go ahead, next slide. Next. And what I'm going to do is just show you one outcome, maybe. Scott?
Yes.
Can you forward that?
Oh, move it ahead?
Yeah, move. Yeah, yeah.
There we go.
I don't think it's changed.
Okay, I'm actually on our multicolored slide showing, I'm getting a message that the connection to the server has been lost on this end.
Okay.
And I'm not sure why that would be because we've got all our networks. There we go. I think it might be coming back up.
Okay. Well, let me just go ahead as we get the slides up. The next slide you will see simply describes the steps we are going through in ARIES. What we have done is chosen cases and particularly looked at stressor-receptor interactions that are risk relevant, ones that have some likelihood of happening. We have carried out the consequence analysis, that is, how bad can it be, and we have scoped to do probability analysis where it is possible. And as we put these pieces together into the future, we will be able to then develop strategies for risk management. The slide after that is simply a map of the U.S. that shows you where our initial 3 cases are. We have picked these cases based on a set of criteria. They need to be real or ready projects. We need developers involved, technology and project developers who are willing to work with us. We want a diverse technical and geographic representation and those that are in the national interest. And as I mentioned, we have chosen 3 initial cases. The first is a tidal case, and that is the Snohomish PUD development proposed for Admiralty Inlet and Puget Sound with the open hydro devices. Our wave case is our Ocean Power Technology Wave Park off Reedsport, Oregon. And our riverine case is the Free Flow Power Technologies, Free Flow Power's development in the Mississippi River near Baton Rouge. So,
Andrea, this is Scott. Are we seeing my slides yet?
I'm still on that same slide.
Okay.
I'm still on the environmental risk evaluate, like 2 slides back.
Let me try to reestablish this, but it shows on my end that I'm still sharing the screen.
But you haven't advanced the slides, is what I'm showing.
Right. I'm actually a slide ahead of you right now.
Okay, maybe it's coming. Maybe I will go on talking about this in order to not waste too much time. So we have developed these 3 case studies, and what we have done, oh good, all right, we're up. Okay, there's our 3 case studies. Why don't you go to the next slide, Scott?
Okay.
I'm just going to show you the outcome of one of these cases. There's many, many, many more. Now this is a ranking of the consequences, how bad can it be, for these various stressor receptor interactions. This happens to be our wave case. Any ranks within a tier are tied, essentially. If you look at the right-hand side, the receptors, what you see, and this is due to both scientific reasons and regulatory reasons, is the ones that rank highly are threatened and endangered species. Regulatorily, we know why they rank high. From a scientific point of view, these are very small populations that are on the edge of being sustainable genetically and reproductively. And what we see is and so we see these various ranks of species. On the left-hand side, the stressor group, what we see is the accidents, oil spills, and lost gear is potentially the greatest consequence to these animals, followed by the physical presence of the wave devices, etc. Now, these are the worst that can happen, if you will. We have done probability analyses in 2 areas because there are data available from other industries. The first being oil spills. We understand vessel interactions with obstructions at sea and the potential for spills. We also understand leaching of toxic chemicals, and there is plenty of data available from other industries. We have done those 2 probability analyses, and what we find, once you go to the next slide, Scott.
Okay, Andrea, it's showing me as offline again, so I'm going to try to reestablish the connection, but I don't think it's on my end. I think it's on the server.
Okay, all righty. So what you'd simply see is in that first tier where we have accidents, disasters, and in this, also in the second tier with leaching chemicals, those simply disappear from the list. They go gray. And what this is representing is we have gained sufficient information to understand some of these highest ranked consequences have very low probability and therefore do not constitute true risks. So by doing that, we have been able to eliminate some of what appeared to be very high priorities. This is the process we will go through with ARIES as we gain more information, so we have the ability to winnow this list down to the true high priorities that can go forward in environmental studies and perhaps even to mitigation. And that's all I wanted to do here, to show you that much. And I'm going to turn it over to Scott Butner to talk about our knowledge management system. And I think, Scott, you can probably go through your first 2 slides orally.
Yeah, I think I will. And I apologize to the audience for the technical difficulties. For some reason, the GoToWebinar is dropping me off the server periodically. So we'll do the best. Fortunately, we've got a landline connection on the phone, so people should still be able to hear me. So my name is Scott Butner. I'm the knowledge-based developer for our team. And Andrea talked about some of the challenges that face both the data collection. Oh, I'm back online now. So both data collection and data analysis, as well as the organizational issues with respect to how do you really pull together all the information needed to build these scenarios in ARIES. And to address those issues, we have been building something called Kivas, which is named for Greek Titan goddess of oceans and rivers, appropriately enough. The primary function of the system is the knowledge base to support the risk framework, or our ARIES system that Andrea just described. It is largely involved with something called evidence collection and marshaling, which means putting the information that's used to support the ARIES models into an appropriate context, and essentially to allow us to drill down, provide transparency into the underlying assumptions and data that go into each of these ARIES simulations, and also to navigate and help manage the risk model results. In other words, to allow users to be able to find that information again when they need it. But as we've built ARIES, we've found that more and more that other functions are also in demand by the user base, and that includes the knowledge portal for the various stakeholders like the MHK environmental research community, regulators, and other stakeholders. And also it's a portal to other important knowledge sources such as the Annex 4 database that's under construction and that Andrea will talk about in just a moment. And then finally, as a collaborative environment for the MHK research community. As you can see, we've shown this graphically, just showing that Kivas serves as sort of a focal point for several different communities of users. The functionality that we're building has been created through interviews with the users, which you should see on this slide. This is just a subset of the most important user needs that were identified through a series of interviews with 8 different stakeholders, telephone interviews conducted over a period of about a month. And those include the need for a high degree of geospatial resolution, so the ability to put data into geospatial context. Everyone is interested in MHK technology, but they're particularly interested in MHK technology that's in their backyard, whether that's figuratively or literally. And so being able to put the information into spatial context is really important. Transparency into the ARIES process. Even though ARIES is not intended to be part of the regulatory process, it is an important framework for and a starting point for dialogue amongst the stakeholders. And in that capacity, there's a strong need for transparency into what are the underlying data that go into these risk models. The ability to associate data with specific sites, in other words, MHK sites such as the Reedsport facility, for example, MHK technologies or specific environmental impacts. This gets to the idea of being able to take various slices through the documents and data sets that are stored in TIFAS. And then finally, the availability of multiple presentation formats for searching, navigating, and presenting the data. We've built TIFAS on top of something called Semantic Mediawiki, which gives us some very interesting platform features. One of those is the ability to semantically search and tag documents. In other words, to tag documents according to what their underlying meaning and key concepts are, not just what key words are in them. We can ingest a variety of different documents, including PDF files, Word documents, web pages, but also actual data sets from simulations and models, as well as multimedia. In fact, the recording of this webinar will be put up on TIFAS shortly after the webinar. Not quite sure of the timing, Anna, but I know that we've made arrangements to do that as soon as we get the file. Semantic annotation, which is one of the features that TIFAS supports, allows rich linkages to be made between the documents based on things like location or technology types or receptor attributes. So, for example, I can do a search of all of the documents in TIFAS that somehow refer to impacts on salmonoid species or to benthic species. I can slice that information in a number of different ways. It's really created to try to put the data that we collect into context. Now I'm going to do something that every developer always sweats a few moments for, which is a live demo. And let's see if we can do this, given our technical challenges today. The audience should be seeing right now the home page for TIFAS on my browser. If someone can confirm that, that would be great.
I can see it, Scott.
Okay, terrific.
Looks good, Scott.
Okay, so here's the home page for TIFAS. This is currently hosted on our server. When we launched the site officially, currently it's in sort of a beta mode, and we're putting it out to the public, but we're actively soliciting input on fixes and changes to the site, and we will be launching the full-fledged version in September of this year. It is very likely to reside on an external server. However, for right now, it's on our P&L server, and you can see just a brief introduction to what TIFAS is, and then some information on how to use TIFAS. But more importantly, most of the meat is here in our knowledge base. And here you can see we have information about MHK technology organized by sites around the country, by the type of technology that's used, and by the categories of environmental effects, including all of our stressors and receptors. However, I mentioned earlier that the primary use, the initial use of TIFAS was to help put context behind the ARIES case studies or use cases. And so I'm going to actually walk you through how we've done that here with one of our case studies from the Reedsport facility that Andrea mentioned earlier. So this actually goes into the initial case study of using ARIES, our risk modeling tool, and provides a summary of the overall project and overview of the technology being used, and then goes through to present the results from one area simulation that was done in order to generate those risk data and priorities, the first, second, and third tiers, as you see, and so forth. However, I can also just navigate directly to more information about the project. This gets to the drill-down transparency that we talked about that we hope is a central feature of what we're trying to do in TEFAS. So now I can read more about the Reedsport project, including a project timeline pulled from the FERC regulatory docket, which are all the documents relevant to the Reedsport licensing facility or licensing process. I can actually pull up a link to the document on the FERC database, and I won't do that for sake of both time and because going to an external site just introduces one more variable that I don't think we need today. But you can see that we've put the documents in a chronological order so that I can basically see the regulatory flow. We're also in the process of adding documents on a technical level as well, so that we see not only the regulatory documents but the technical documents on this timeline. I can also go down to our current implementation of a geospatial view of the site, simply marking the site boundaries in Reedsport. As we'll discuss in a moment, and as you'll hear more later, we're working with the folks at Boehmer to integrate and collaborate with them on their multi-purpose marine cadastre, which you'll hear more about in just a few minutes, so I won't go into that. I've mentioned that one of the things that we try to do in TEFAS is provide the ability to link documents to a particular MHK site or facility. And here we've done that by linking documents that are in the knowledge base related to marine creatures that are expected to be in the study area. And so, for example, one area of concern for this is gray whales, which migrate up and down the Oregon coast. And so I can link to documents. In this case, I've just got an abstract of the document with a link to the original. We also can link to entire copies of documents, and we're currently working with the Oregon State Marine Sciences Library, Oregon State University Marine Sciences Library, to build our collection of open source documents and peer-reviewed scientific literature that relates to these facilities. I can also look at documents organized by stressor, so I can look at documents according to what kind of stress on the environment the facility is expected to produce. And you can see here primarily the documents relate to noise issues. If I go back to the knowledge base, you'll see that I can also take a look and navigate into these according to the stressors and see all of the documents related to acoustic stress on the environment, as well as a faceted browse, so I can take a look and say, okay, I want to see just the documents on this subject by Brandon Southall, for example, and use that to narrow down the selection. And let's see if I can find another author to give me a second document. I guess these are all on the same author. As we add content to TEFAS, we also have added a recently added content window so that you can see what's being added to the system in recent days or weeks. And we are in the process of deploying a blog for the knowledge base, which is more of a news of the site kind of approach to presenting the information, so that you'll see as each new item is added, each new document or new pieces of information are added to the site, you'll see blog entries that reflect that and summarize what you'll see. That's sort of a quick tour of TEFAS, and recognition of the time, I want to move on now and go back to our presentation.
Yeah, Scott, you know, we're really behind, so I'm thinking we may want to just possibly skip the Q&A session and just finish up pretty quickly. And if anybody has any questions, if we've got time at the end, we'll get those addressed.
That's what I thought. So that's why we're moving on here. Just real quickly, Andrea, did you want to address the Annex 4 slide?
Sure. We're just about finished here, Anna. So in addition to which there is an international aspect of this, the International Energy Agency Ocean Energy Systems Implementing Agreement is a group of 28 nations with interest in MHK, and they have a series of annexes, which is simply a collaborative agreement to carry out a task. Annex 4 deals with the gathering of environmental data from the member nations in order to do these kinds of analyses and understand what the high priorities are. We will work those data into ESRI, but there is a whole separate set of Annex 4 outcomes. DOE is the lead, or U.S. is the lead, and DOE is the operating agent, and partners with other federal agencies, including FERC, FOAM, and NOAA. We will be supporting DOE in this by creating a portion of the TESIS database for the Annex 4 data. We have a couple of collaborators in working with us in Europe, the Wave Energy Center in Portugal, University of Plymouth in the UK, helping bring these data together. We currently have a survey out to developers and researchers throughout all the OESIA nations to collect these data. We had an experts workshop last September in Dublin where we brought 8 nations, 58 researchers and regulators together and developers together to help guide this process. So those data will be coming online over the next year. Next, please. And just to wrap up here, just go ahead and click through those. Just we were asked about when are these things available. Actually, go back one.
There we go.
We have these first 3 ARIES cases out now with the probability analyses coming online. We'll have 2 more cases by the end of September. Next year, we will be looking at OTEC, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion, and another wave case. And we are exploring various techniques for getting at probability analysis in the absence of very much data from other industries and other sciences. TESIS has put out the initial documentation, and as Scott said this year, and as Scott said, the prototype went up last spring. We are working with BOMER with the Marine Cadastre, and the full deployment will be in late September, and there will be an announcement that goes out broadly for TESIS. At the moment, as I said, we're building the Annex 4 portion of it. There will also be an offshore wind portion of TESIS that is under construction right now. Again, environmental effects. Go ahead, and I think we're done. Just like to thank you, and our contact information is there. We'd love to hear from you, and especially because this was a little choppy, we are actually doing an hour-long webinar on ARIES and TESIS aimed at the MHK industry, but open to absolutely everyone on Friday at noon East Coast time. If anyone's interested, email me or Scott, and we'll send you the invitation to it, so you can link into that. Anyway, thank you very much. And we'd just like to acknowledge the wonderful support we get from the Department of Energy and also the help we've gotten from a lot of MHK developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott and Andrea, and I'm sorry to all the presenters and attendees of the webinar. We apologize for the technical difficulties, and we will be moving along as quickly as we can from here. We may need to save the question and answers until the very end, if that's okay, and just keep sending in your questions to me, and I'll keep track of them. Thank you.
Anna, who would you like me to pass along to now? To you or over to Adam?
If you could pass it over to Adam, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, I've tried. There we go.
Adam, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good.
All right. So you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Should. All right. So everything look fine?
Looks great.
Okay, let's dive right in then, since we're running short on time here. So my name is Adam Bodie. I'm a GIS spatial analyst with the NOAA Coastal Services Center in Charleston, South Carolina. And along with me, I have Christine Taylor from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement out of the Herndon office, and let her go into more details how we're going to split up the presentation. I'll jump into our project website in a second. It wants to advance. And then she'll wrap up the second portion after I give a quick demo discussing about the importance of the project, why you should care, who we're partnering with data-wise, what we're working on now, and then forecasting into the future what we're going to be focusing on. So as you see here, this is the project homepage that was just released about a week ago, maybe a week and a half now. Really wanted to highlight not only the viewer, which we did in the past, but really honed in on this data registry as well. That it's kind of the foundation for the entire project. It drives the mapping application. It drives a lot of our use by regions and states and other federal entities. So we not only wanted to provide easy access to the viewer, but also provide access to the data itself through our spatial data registry. You can also see across the top our navigation. So we have an About page that talks about the history of the project, who's involved. The partnership page goes into what we're involved with here at the Coastal Services Center, what does BOMR handle out of their office, and also who we're working with in the regions. As I mentioned, a spatial data registry, which I'll go into a little bit more here shortly. A regional resources page, which is new. It gives a map. I'd pull up a demo here, but in interest of time, just to give you a quick idea. It's a page that has a map, and you can basically click through different regions. Say the Northeast gives you a list of technical points of contact, whether there's kind of a regional portal or some sort of data aggregation effort currently going on in that region. It also gives you a variety of links off to various state and regional coastal atlases. So it kind of gives you that picture of, we're the federal data repository for a lot of authoritative data and information. Here's the information for different regions and states as well. We have a map gallery, which I'll go through, so I'll skip over that. A support page, which we've redesigned to include more how-to documents and tips and tricks. Things as you see in the bottom there, which says need to know, how to use the map gallery, how to use our data services in ArcMap, a quick start guide to kind of get you up and rolling with the tool, and a variety of other information resources. And then lastly, an updates page. We're updating the application, seems like on at least a monthly basis, if not more frequently, to include new data, updated data sources, as well as additional functionality. So this kind of gives you a real quick look. There's an RSS feed where you can pull it into Google Reader if you want to stay abreast of what we're working on. Kind of gives you that one quick look of what's been added, what's been changed, that our users have requested in the past. So what is the multipurpose marine cadastre? So in the truest sense, it's a marine information system for the outer continental shelf and state waters. Provides a common data framework for supportive decision-making. Kind of a bland definition, main impetus. I won't go into too much of the history, but the main driver behind this effort is the Energy Policy Act of 2005, specifically a section that was to address alternative energy uses on the OCS, basically directed DOE, Department of Commerce, and several others to develop an OCS mapping initiative. Long story short, we had existing relationships with BOMR, the Coastal Services Center did through the Marine Boundary Working Group. We developed an implementation plan. We've been working on this, I believe, since 2006 now, several years, to kind of bring us where we are now, where we continue to add functionality, continue to add data, and address our users' needs. So the most common question we probably get is, what the heck is a cadastre, and what is a marine cadastre, to be more specific? So just to give a little bit more context and define those terms. So in the, a marine cadastre is analogous to a land-based cadastre or a county parcel database, if I imagine folks are familiar with that term. So it's an official register of location, quantity, value, and ownership. It conveys rights and restrictions, a variety of different information. So in the water, it's taking this block sort of system and it represents the leasing rights in managed areas rather than specific ownership as it would on the land side. So that's kind of where the cadastre term comes in. On the left-hand side, we're referring to the grid system or the block system that BOMR's been using for a long time now to convey leasing rights. On the right-hand side, it's again conveying these areas at a finer granularity. These are the Massachusetts request for interest areas that BOMR put out. Now these aren't the official ones, the latest and greatest. This is just to kind of give you an idea of what these sort of boundaries can be used for. I'm pretty sure I'm speaking to the choir here as far as these boundaries are concerned. So what do you get when you toss in the multi-purpose marine cadastre term? what we mean here is that you have your core cadastral boundaries. You have your marine jurisdictions, your EEZ, your Submerged Lands Act boundary. It's when you start tossing in marine mammal data and other human use information. There's a variety of different uses that it can be used for beyond just citing renewable energy or offshore uses. Things like ocean planning, habitat conservation, you know, a wide range of things that it can be used for. But we realized that, you know, the 70+ data layers that we have in the tool can't serve everybody's purposes. You have your own state data, folks have their own regional data, you may have data that's on your desktop. So what we've done is we've created this map gallery. Kind of gives you a starting place where you can build upon these custom maps, add your own data. It's all built on, I'm not sure how folks are familiar with how things have progressed with ArcGIS.com, but a lot of these maps are, actually all these maps are built within ArcGIS.com. You can browse this page, say you're interested in whale occurrences, navigation channels, open the map, see what we have in there. It's a mix between data that's from the cadastre, but also different data sources that we've pulled in. You can add your own spatial data. You can then save that map and share it to whomever you want. So you really just matching up the federal data authoritative source that we have with any data that may be for your specific purpose. So to kind of summarize the three main components of the project, you know, we were always really focused on the viewer. As you can see on the screen grab, that's the old website that we had, really focused on the viewer. That was kind of the bread and butter. But we realized that, you know, the authoritative spatial data is really the framework that all of the project is based on, and everything's expanded from there. So it's the authoritative spatial data. We go out, we have a massive spreadsheet that kind of lists out when we go out and harvest data on a periodic basis, how often data sets are updated. We're working with the authoritative source for these data, so you always know you're getting the latest and greatest from our website. We're also developing a number of framework-based layers, such as marine jurisdictions data set, where we've taken a variety of these disparate boundaries, pulled them into one single feature class, really did a good job of cartography and looking at the attribution, kind of standardizing things, you know, really working on the symbology, as well as a shipping data set that includes things like shipping safety fairways and shipping channels. And these were all digitized either from the charts or the Federal Register. So, you know, we're tracing things all the way back to the authoritative source, as well as regulated areas. So those could be anchorage areas, and we're looking at other data sets as well. And then, as I said, the web map viewer provides ability to generate maps, visualize the data set. It's really the search and discovery tool for all the data sets that we have. And it also provides, you know, some plotting capabilities and measuring, which I'll demo here in a second. And then lastly, it's the technical support and the consultation. You know, we work on a case-by-case basis to provide technical support. If you have data sets that you're particularly interested in providing to the cadastre, we can help you stand up a web service. We can work with you to visualize the data. We can provide best practices and a variety of other technical support. So it's kind of a broad term. And lastly here, I wanted to dive into, I was going to do a tape demo here, but it honestly just moves too quick for me to catch up with. So let me just exit out of here and pull up the tool itself. As Scott said, this is always the developer's nightmare here when you pull up something live. But so this is the main interface that you get after you accept the disclaimer. This is built in ESRI's using ESRI's Flex API. So it kind of allows a lot of customization. You can drag and drop things, minimize, close, pull things back up. You know, it's really nice and slick and expandable. So you can see we have the list of data sets here on the left-hand side. So you can kind of expand these categories, get the whole laundry list of data sets. You can flip over to a legend tab that kind of shows you, based on what you have turned on, marine jurisdictions, shows state seaward boundary on down the list. So real quickly here, you know, we also have a variety of base maps. We're going to be adding the ESRI ocean-based base map in the near future. So you can toggle between satellite and street and physical base maps here. And then along the top, let's see, we have a quick zoom tab that allows you to quickly zoom to a variety of different areas. If you're interested in, say, the South Atlantic, you can zoom here. Kind of just gives you a quick bookmark to quickly zoom and pan around. So let me minimize this a bit. So then the tools are across the top here. So we have an identify tool. We can go in and add the shipping data set that I mentioned, hopefully. There we go. So the identify tool, pull up the tool here, move the window around where you can get the best view, click on the data set you want to identify, and then boom. So you see, because we standardized the attributes on these, you can expand this list and get a quick idea of where you identified the separation zone, when was it effective, the instance code, and kind of other information here. Some other tools that we have a measure tool. Now these aren't 100% geodetic cadastral measurements. We're going to be looking into kind of passing these sort of coordinates back so we get more accurate measurements just based on the ellipsoid that's used for all these web maps. You don't get really accurate measurements. So you can measure based on kilometers and statute miles. I'll quickly go through here. So you can add straight line distances. So you can see 50 nautical miles. You can buffer on free lines. Add things. Let's see. So you can also buffer based on points. Sorry for going so quick here. Just trying to run through the functionality. So you can see you can add a variety of different points and buffers. As I said, you can zoom in here. Then a tool that I know Bureau of Ocean Energy Management requested was the ability to kind of plot coordinates. So when they're getting these applications, they wanted a way to quickly plot these coordinates in this mapping application. So it allows you to add points in decimal degrees in minutes, degrees, minutes, and seconds. You can quickly plot and zoom to that feature, and then create a nice map. Add a title, a subtitle. If you want to include the graphics or not. Save as PDF and print your map. And then lastly, a tool that I find is kind of hidden, but it's incredibly useful is, say you pan around here, you get everything set up just right, you add the data sets that you're interested in, and then you want to share it with your colleague that's down the hall, somebody that's in a different state. What you can do is click this link tool here. It creates a link that you can then copy. And just for this case, we'll paste in a different tab. And then it should take you back down to that area with the data sets turned on. And then we're going to be looking at, in the future, a way to kind of save user-drawn graphics and really just increase that sort of functionality. So let's see. So next, we have the data download. Takes you back to the Spatial Data Registry. Sit on the home page. I think that was the 10-second tour. So if there aren't any immediate questions, I think we'll hold those to the end. I will pass it over to Chris to wrap up the presentation. Chris?
Hi, can everybody hear me? Adam, can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, just fine.
Okay. My name is Chris Taylor, and I am the co-lead with NOAA on the Multipurpose Marine Cadastre here at BOMER. But since we seem to be running out of time, I'm going to go really quick as possible. Thank you, Adam. So basically, this slide's just asking the question, why is Multipurpose Marine Cadastre a valuable tool? And first off, it has all the pertinent boundaries and a lot of other data that's already provided to get planning in the offshore areas started, whether that be wind or MHK or some kind of other CMSB type planning. All our boundaries are from the authoritative sources, so you know you're using the correct and most up-to-date geospatial data if you need to update or make new boundaries. It can be used to expose data served by other authoritative sources, so as we get to know other data sets are available, we'll consider putting them in through the Multipurpose Marine Cadastre. It's not just for renewable energy projects, as I mentioned. It can be used for other siting projects, navigational rerouting, enforcement planning, gap analysis, just to name a few. And for those states and other user groups that don't want to find and serve all the same data, this tool can serve as the basis for building a specialized set of tools that they would like to do. So create your own map projects, but just pull in what we've already provided for you. So basically, the MMC team has put a lot of work into making the most authoritative data sets needed for offshore planning available via a single virtual space. And you might need other data sets as well for your planning purposes, but we have taken a lot of the headache out of finding many of the important layers for decision making. Next, Adam. So, we're always asking the question, so who's really using this tool? And we know, of course, that BOMER is using it. We primarily use it for, throwing together quick maps for documents or making a point with people who ask us questions or figuring out, what other data that we still need for studies and things like that.
We know that the regional ocean councils and also the IRMA system are using our base layers as background. And then NOAA Fisheries has also been using it for quick permit review for MHK permits actually on the California coast or off the California coast. The energy industry and some of our policymakers have come up to me at a number of different venues and told me that they use the system and given me all sorts of emails about how they like using the system to be able to create something quickly to give to congressional aides or just so that they can determine what other data sets might be needed for their initial assessment. Next, Adam. So as you can see, we have a lot of federal data providers. This is our list of all of our providers. And we're harvesting data and pushing it out to others for the most part. What we want is for the authoritative source to stand up their web services that's ingested through a variety of viewers, the MMC being one of them. So once you've stood up a service, then anybody else can ingest your service as well. So rather than people constantly assembling data sets from other sources, it makes it a lot easier, and I think we're to that point in this century to be able to do that. So we also want to link to the downloadable data for those who want to use the data in their own GIS systems and not just view or print the map. Most data sets are downloadable, and those that aren't are listed as such in our data sheet. So some of the military data sets in the future may not be available for download. So Adam's already advanced my slide to all of our data themes, and I'm not really going to go into these, but those with the asterisks by them are those areas where we need more data and are now concentrating our efforts a little bit more. As you can see, we have quite a few different categories of data. Next. So what are we working on? We're currently trying really hard to get the best possible data for our biological data category, one of those asterisk areas. However, these are hard data sets to come by in a format that's easily usable, so we're working with subject matter experts with the agencies to make some of the studies and results available in an easier to understand output, mostly predictive density models. This includes bird, turtle, and marine mammal data. And if available, the source data sets will also be made available for download. But we're working on these. These aren't something we can do overnight. We're also working with DOD to get their operations and warnings areas into the MMC. NOAA is going to be providing a seamless cache nautical chart service in the next couple of months that we'll be making available as a background layer. Everybody wants a chart in the background. We're working with the Coast Guard to make AIS data available to show the ship traffic density. And if you don't know what AIS is, it's basically the automated information for ship tracking that they use for large vessels, not all the small ones. And we will also be putting together a data set that includes hurricane and extratropical storm historic tracks. We're probably going to try and get the IUS sensor locations in there so that you can link back to the sensor feeds or at least to the IUS portal that they're coming through. NOAA and BOMA are going to be working together to generate a spatial bibliography layer that will link to many published studies done specifically for BOMA. So our studies group contracts out for a lot of studies for EISs and EAs, so we'd like to make that information available through a spatial footprint. And although we're up to now, we've only incorporated federal authoritative data sets, we are starting to accept on a case-by-case basis data sets that are in common use and generally accepted by CMSP or renewable energy planners. An example is the TNC North Atlantic Marine Ecoregional Assessment, benthic, and ecohabitat layers that should be available in the near future. We're trying to work with them to expose some of their layers within the MMC. So, other improvements in the near future. I've already mentioned the new data that we're working on, and we plan to clean up some others. This includes newly available REST services that were formerly being harvested by NOAA and updated periodically within the MMC services. BOMA is going to be making their data available through a service, and I know that we're going to be making NOAA's marine cadastre layers available as well. So these services will make it possible for the data source to update the data as needed and not need to inform the MMC team of any data updates, because that'll just happen on the fly in the background. We've hosted a user workshop this past February to assess user needs, and we got some feedback from other meetings and WebExes like this. So based on information from those sources, we really plan to include some reporting ability by selected data sets, select by ability, and add to map ability if possible, if we can figure that out. So add some of your own data to the maps that we have. And since we don't want to be the ocean data kitchen sink, we also plan to make links within our marinecadastre.gov webpage to other tools. We've actually already started that, so this would be web pages and data portals that we haven't incorporated into our own system so that our users are aware of their existence. And we will include a community of practice portion on the site to allow other users interested in creating similar data services and portals a set of common practices and guidelines to start with. And we have also contracted with ASA to create a tool that converts the U.S. Coast Guard NEMIA format to an ARC-10 geodatabase, and a separate tool on top of that that then allows the ARC-10 user to query and clean the data in that geodatabase. We've also pre-created the geodatabases by month and UTM for all of 2009, and that should be available in about a month or two. And you can go to the next one. I'm going to talk about the ESRI one, Adam. So ESRI is developing a decision support tool taking advantage of the MMC, cadastre, and physical data layer sort of as a freebie to showcase their ability to work in the CMSP arena. It will not only highlight blocks based on user criteria, but give a report out on what the criteria was and eventually output the blocks that were highlighted as a shapefile or a report. And they're also working on incorporating a viewshed tool into the block selector. So in the case of wind, it's sort of like, well, how far can I see a wind farm from a certain part of the beach? But actually what I want them to do is tell me what parts of the beach the wind farm can see from each wind farm. So that'll give the developer a better idea of what parts of the coast that they need to consider talking with if they're planning on putting something in particular blocks. And then other regions are, as I mentioned before, and I think Adam did too, already marrying their own data sets with our data sets together. So within the Marco portal and the Northeast portal, and this will also be a component within the National Information Management System for CMSP, and I sit on that team as well. So next slide, sorry. So in summary, basically the MMC has been issue-driven to date, primarily renewable energy siting and permitting, but it's important to reiterate that the application is really about the data and the tools and support. All of these elements work together to provide a robust system that can support many types of ocean activities. And that's all I have for now, and I kind of doubt we have time for questions, but I'll leave that to Anna.
Hey, thanks, Adam and Christine. That was great. Yeah, we're going to have to leave question session until after everybody has a chance to present. But if you guys could go ahead and transfer the presentation to Gareth.
All right. And it's saying that he cannot take control, although that doesn't make any sense. Okay, here we go.
All right.
All right, Gareth?
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, we can see your screen now, Gareth.
Okay. So it's a great pleasure to talk to you all from Scotland. I'm working here for a company, Aquaterra, in Orkney, and what I'd like to do is talk to you about some of the perspectives we have on environmental risks here, maybe being a bit ahead in terms of deployment, and try and show you some of those experiences. So what I want to talk through is, as I say, what we've been doing here in Orkney, what the environmental issues and sensitivities are, the current energy-related risks that we see around our waters without wet renewables, looking at the realities of development so far and what the future environmental pressures might be, and then looking at how we're managing those risks and opportunities as capacity grows, and then lastly just to comment on international collaboration and the application of lessons learned around the world. So Orkney, for those of you that don't know, lies off the north of Scotland. It's a small set of islands, but it's the global centre for marine energy. And the reason we can say that is that we've already had 6 wave energy device deployments and 6 tidal energy device deployments in these islands, and there's another 4, 2 wave and 2 tidal, that are on the way. And that's led to a total of over 50 deployment and recovery operations in the 6 years that that's been going on. And it's on the back of about 20 years of effort. It was 1990 really when the idea of developing marine energy started in Orkney, and it took us until 2002 to establish EMHK, and soon after we had the first technologies coming into our waters. This picture here shows you the quayside in Kirkwall, one of the main ports here on the islands, and this was last summer where we had 3 devices being deployed at the same time. It gives you an idea of the capacity involved. So one of our key issues that we've had to deal with revolves around our local community and population. The community's been at the forefront of this development from the start, and in Orkney terms our community means a population of about 20,000 people. We have the main centre for marine renewables in Stromness, and this is this town here, which is where I'm speaking to you from at the moment. Kirkwall, which is the capital of the islands, has a population of 7,000, and Edy, which is a small island beside the tidal site, has a population of 350. So you can see with this level of populations there are some issues around the fragility of the economy. What's been marked so far is the way in which companies and people have embraced marine energy. We now have over 150 people employed in the marine renewable sector in Orkney. Because of that level of employment, we need an income of around £200,000 a month to support those jobs, and we're very delighted, therefore, that the number of developers that have sought to come to Orkney has increased over the years. In Aquaterra itself, we've worked with about 20 or so, we're one of 20 or so companies in the local supply chain which provide environmental and operational support services. And we're lucky enough to work in around 20 countries around the world, including the USA, and we work for or have worked for over 30 government organizations, technology and utility companies. What I wanted to do is introduce you to some of the sensitivities that we have in Orkney in terms of mammals and large sea life. So we have populations of cetaceans, in particular the harbour porpoise, killer whales or orcas, as found in the west coast of the States, minke whales and another dolphin. We also have prolific populations of the harbour seal and the grey seal. This is the grey seal, this is the harbour seal. And we have a number of other large marine life. We have basking sharks, which are becoming more common as the waters warm around north Scotland. We have coastal otters, much smaller than the sea otters of the west coast, but still quite prolific along the coast. And we have the occasional sea turtles as well. In terms of birds, we have a collection of birds which inhabit the tidal streams and the offshore waters. Around the tidal streams in particular, we have shags, a small bird, black guillemot, fulmars, eider duck, and then more offshore the auks, long-tailed duck, and what we call divers, the equivalent of loons in North America. In terms of the seabed conditions, in the tidal streams it's generally bedrock. Any sediment is thin and mobile. We have prolific fauna. You can see here in these photographs all of the rock surfaces are covered mainly by animals, but these species are quite common and widespread species and are not thought to be particularly sensitive. In the wave sites that we've surveyed so far, the seabed is generally sedimentary. There are patches of bedrock and also glacial moraine debris, but these areas are quite dynamic. The sediments are turned over by storm events, and the seabed itself is not particularly remarkable in terms of the wildlife present. As well as the wildlife, we've got other sea users as well, and here we can see a selection of sea user sensitivities in the area. So first of all, in terms of merchant shipping, we have an oil terminal within Orkney and oil tankers which take that oil around the world. We have ferries, we have fishing boats of different types, we have oil and gas production happening offshore, we also have aquaculture inshore, and we have marina and recreational boating activity as well. So one of the things that we wrestle with is that marine renewables is a kind of new kid on the block, and we need to remember that there are existing risks associated with our energy production. And here what I've done is listed some of the impacts that we see at the moment that are associated with energy production. So we have a basket of effects arising from the global warming. We also have changes in species distributions and species extinctions arising from that. We then have more immediate effects in terms of oil spills, oily water discharges, and other activities related to oil spill events. And we have radionuclide pollution from our nuclear industry and a range of other physical effects associated with our energy industries. So our starting point for against which we need to test marine renewables isn't without its existing issues. So what have been our experiences to date with wave energy and tidal energy? So first of all, I'm going to look at wave energy. So in terms of our, we've had shoreline operating systems operating in Orkney for, we've had shoreline systems operating in Scotland now for 10 years. This is the WaveGen plant in the island of Islay. EMHK was established in 2002, and the first device came just a year later, and this first device was the wave roller device, which is now being tested in Portugal. We've then got the Polaris 1, which came into operation in 2004-2005, and that's been followed by the Polaris 2, a larger and longer version of Polaris 1. Aquamarine's Oyster has also been deployed off EMHK, and we have most recently seen the Wello wave energy device arrive in Orkney, and this is a device that's come from Finland. Just south of Orkney, in the Moray Firth, OPT have deployed a 150 kilowatt power buoy, and here we have some of the an example of the diversity of conditions that we experience in Orkney, from obviously very good calm conditions to very rough conditions for installing these wave energy devices. What we've seen through this is that basically the wildlife in the area takes virtually no notice of these machines, and there's not really been any significant impacts associated with wave energy. In terms of tidal energy, again, there's been a variety of technologies deployed. There's been 6 different turbines either deployed or in deployment at the present time. And again, we've seen very little signs of behavioral change at all from the wildlife in the area associated with these deployments. What's been of particular interest in terms of the tidal sites has also been the vessel activity associated with the deployments, and here you can see some of the vessels that have been involved. And in fact, this last week we've had 3 of these large dynamically positioned vessels working at the same time in the Fall of Warness. So what of the future? at the present time, our two operational sites are this tidal site here, which I've just been going over, and our wave site here on the west coast. These other marked out areas are what are called Crown Estate lease areas, which are held by various companies for wave and tidal energy. And these are set to be developed over the next 5 to 10 years. We then have other areas which are potential areas for development indicated here in the oval. So our total capacity, we believe, in Orkney is around 5,000 megawatts. But to deliver that energy, it's not only about the devices themselves, it's also about the supporting technology and infrastructure. And you can see down the left-hand side some of the ports, some of the electrical infrastructure and support vessels that are going to be required for that. So in order to manage these impacts, we've been looking at a system which in some ways is very similar to that you've heard from already. It's a system of prioritizing potential interactions, and what we've done in this system is looked at species, and we've looked at the technology, and we've looked at the environmental pressures that can arise through interactions between these two groups. And where there's a species or habitat that's vulnerable to a particular pressure, or a technology or mooring system that can give rise to that environmental pressure, we look at the interactions that may arise and evaluate their potential significance. What you could also see is there's a number of interactions which have no consequences or where there's uncertainty, and perhaps unlike some of the earlier presentations, what we've been trying to do is not focus too much on the uncertainties, but to park them and deal with them later on. What that's led to is a set of priority issues which you can see here, and these issues are very similar, I think, to the issues that are coming out of the work in the US, and it's interesting that there is that degree of similarity. What we found is that not all of these issues apply to all species or all technologies at all places, and obviously there's a degree of specificity about that. So in the analysis that we've undertaken, we identified 30,000 possible interactions. Of those, only 1,800 was scored as potentially significant. And when we've looked at specific technologies in particular areas, that number reduces further. So here, for a horizontal axis turbine with a monopile foundation, we ended up with only 345 possible interactions, and they related to just 12 of those priority issues. So in terms of the geographical context for this impacts, what we've looked at is a weighting system where we can look at the possible impacts that arise on a geographical basis based on the sensitivities that exist and also based upon the technologies that are going to be used. And I've given an example here which relates to, in this case, onshore grid planning, and it shows the suitability of different areas for landfalls, for different types of electrical infrastructure, and for buried cables and overhead lines. And this grid-based system, which Paul Manson's going to speak a bit about later on, has been shown to be very useful not only for onshore developments but also for offshore developments. And what we've done there is applied a very simple impact matrix system, looking at types of technology and looking at the types of activities that are taking place. It's informed by geographical data, very similar as you've seen in the marine cadastre. Here, this is one of our layers of data looking at fisheries activity, and you can see the fishing grounds displayed here in the green color where the ships are slowing down to undertake tows, rather than here the red colors where the ships are passing through on transit. And when we put all of this data together, it creates a hot and cold surface for us in terms of the suitability of areas for marine energy activities, and in this case for wave developments. So what are the lessons that can be learned from marine energy? I think first of all that marine renewables is a global business. It's exemplified by the fact that I'm speaking to you today from Scotland. The sites that are being developed are not universal. Not every sea area can be suitable for marine energy, but they are widespread. They cover a number of different habitats. The species in these habitats may be different, but very often what we see from traveling around the world is that the niches they fulfill are very similar, and therefore we believe there's a strong degree of learning that can take place. In terms of the devices, again, they may be different, but their principles are also similar, and we think that you can learn from one device to another. The early devices that we've seen have not shown any hidden impacts themselves. What has happened is that it's been apparent that the DP vessels, which are used to deploy some of these devices, may have issues, particularly for some kinds of seals. And it's also been apparent that the integrity of navigational channels and the community benefits coming from local content are going to be particularly important. The important thing is that applying this learning from early developments can help avoid unnecessary costs, unnecessary delays, and an unnecessary degree of precaution, because we can show that some of the fears that existed were not real. So we see the key priorities as needing to build mechanisms for sharing data and experiences across international boundaries, as is already starting, as you can see from some of the other projects. And the most important thing to remember is that renewables are better for the environment than existing energy systems, and we should start treating them in that way. Thank you. Hello?
Thanks, Gareth. That sounds great. I believe the next presenter on the list is Paul Manson.
Great. All right. Gareth, can you hand over control, or I can?
Yep. Oh. Is that coming over to you, Paul?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try again.
All right.
All right, Paul, you're up and running.
Great, great. Well, thanks. So thanks, everyone. My name's Paul Manson. I'm with Parametrics, and we're a consulting firm in the western U.S., and I'm actually based in Portland, Oregon. I'm an environmental planner with our Ecosystem Services group, and I just want to talk today a bit about some decision support tools that actually Gareth and I have been involved in for the past couple of years. And thanks again to DOE for the invite on this. So the two pieces that I'll speak about are the Oregon Wave Energy Trust Cumulative Effects Framework and Bureau of Ocean Energy Management managed Bayesian analysis for spatial siting project. Let me see here if my screen's not advancing yet. There we go. Both of these projects have been centered around Oregon, though the Bayesian analysis piece is focusing on the West Coast at first. The Oregon Wave Energy Trust project was identified by OWET several years ago as a key issue that developers would have a challenge addressing piecemeal on a case-by-case basis, and so made the investment to create a framework to support the industry early on and really hope to kickstart responsible understanding of what ocean marine energy development would look like. And so OWET's initial efforts have really grown into a much broader understanding of issues, and also in part leverage the interest of the Bayesian analysis work to come and look off of Oregon as well. So that vision at that point by OWET's really driven this going forward. Before I dive into a couple of these examples, I just want to talk a little bit about how we see decision support and decision support challenges. One of the key messages here is that decision support technologies don't make decisions. That's for regulators, policymakers, the public stakeholders to do, but rather provides a common foundation and understanding for talking about what trade-offs, conflicts, opportunities are. And throughout all the decision support technologies that have been developed out there, you can sort of see four common themes run through all of them. They all try to work with raw data and filter and process it to create a data library or repository or portal, and that you then need a decision engine or some model that is able to relate that data, synthesize it, and take the data and turn it into knowledge for decision making. And a final component that's very important is presenting those results back out. making access easier, and that's often through a user interface. And I think we've seen pieces of all this today. The two tools that I'll talk about today really focus on that decision engine, that middle piece, and how we relate all this data and make sense with it. So one thing that we use is a sort of framing lens to help understand a lot of different resources on the ocean as ecosystem services. And I've got a quote here from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report, which was a UN-chartered effort to look at how the world is changing from human impacts and how our society's dependence on the environment needs to be better understood. And so what we're really looking at when we look on the ocean for impacts from devices or existing uses is to understand what are the benefits that communities derive from the ocean, and what are the benefits that may be tiered off those to the sort of biodiversity measures to understand what that change our well-being. And so as we change the economic structure or social structure or use structure, how do all of those balance across different scenarios we propose in different ocean management schemes? The nice thing about this approach is that it's an easier way to make a common denominator across resources. So we can have a conversation, not necessarily directly a species to species or energy resource to species, but rather understand that as decisions are made, what do we lose, what do we gain, and then have a more constructive conversation about what that really means. Another important piece with an ecosystem service perspective is that it allows us to integrate multiple resources and tie high-level policy or decisions down to site-level measurements. And this is one of the key pieces in our regulatory scheme that will be very important, is understanding how we can set goals and then tie those to performance measures at a permitting level. And this is a challenge that happens on the terrestrial side for aquatic species, and it's obviously a continuing issue on the ocean. And really the key here is that we identify the ecosystem services that are concerned, what are those functions on the ocean that are important to us, diagnose the physical, ecological, chemical, social, or economic processes that support the service, and that's that function level in the middle. And once we know what the services are and what the processes are that we worry about, identify the attributes from the data that let us know where those services are being performed. And so through this sort of a framework, we've created a series of decision support tools in GIS that allow for a more objective conversation about what the process trade-offs are that help set the table for the policy conversation. So the first one I'll step into here is the Oregon Wave Energy Trust cumulative effects structure. There's really two tracks that occur within that analysis, and it's a series of weighted product models that look at baseline function performance, and then compare that with a series of development scenarios and existing use scenarios. So what we, and Gareth sort of raised this point, but one of the important pieces in the OWET experience is that we are looking ahead to what cumulative effects means under a NEPA review. And important there is that we have to appreciate what existing pressures and impacts are on resources, the impacts from the proposed activity, as well as what are the impacts we might see from future foreseeable events. And we have to understand sort of the delta among all of those in order to speak intelligently about cumulative effects. So in the OWET structure, we will start with the baseline, a series of function maps that show those resources on the water in a grid structure, and then relate the functions, which might be a species support or a physical process, to aspects of ocean energy development. So it may be related to mooring decisions or energy absorber decisions, which then comes into a core modeling process that identifies the delta between all of these different interactions on impacts and resources and develops an output map to help understand what the scenarios look like. So what are the function maps? The functions that we're looking at are about 22 overall, but 15 are mapped currently in the software. On the ecological side, what this looks like is cetaceans and pinnipeds, kelp support fish species, and physical processes that are important for a healthy functioning ecosystem off the Oregon coast. But we also include social and use functions, which include a lot of the tougher issues, but we've been lucky in Oregon that there has been such support for a better understanding of fishing effort and recreational resources that we actually have spatially explicit understandings of those. So all of these functions provide a baseline of existing uses, existing natural uses and natural activities to then start running scenarios against. So we take those services and functions on the left side and stack them up against activities on the right side to ask a series of questions about what happens if we do different activities within portions of the water off the coast. And I mentioned the functions are, those 15 or so, are weighted product models, essentially asking the question, how well does a given patch of water support that function? So if it's for cetaceans, how well does that patch of water support migratory activities, feeding, and foraging? On the device side, we ask a similar question. How well does that patch of water support a device? And that can include how well is the anchoring potential there, the wave energy potential, and some of the connectivity issues to shore as it relates to cabling and servicing the devices. So this is an example then of how these outputs now look. 3 examples here out of the several that we have. Gray whale support, which is working from actually building off of some research OET funded along with work that's been done in Oregon over the last several decades to create essentially a relative index of where we think areas off the coast are most important to gray whale, in this case for migration and forage. In the middle is an example for visual resources, and this is showing areas off of the Oregon coast that are most visible from a number of different important resources, including just the high points along the coast, but as well as from community areas, protected areas, recreation areas, and then from beach-based surveys of where individuals use the coast. And then finally on the right is the probability for a device's suitability. So how well can a point absorber offshore use a piece of water to generate energy? So in this case, we're looking at 3 very different types of information and trying to compare then across those. What does it mean if we reappropriate some areas, or if we want to have them coexist? What do those compatibilities look like, and what does the interaction look like? In the tool, we're using a scenario-based analysis, and so functions are related to uses, and proposed developments then are run through a series of ArcGIS model builder tools that tie to an MS Access database that captures those impact assumptions. The important thing, and the reason I mentioned the model builder and the Access database, is that they're flexible and they can be changed as new information comes in. Different scenarios can be understood, or even sensitivity analysis across different scenarios and different ranges. The example here shows the interaction of devices with a couple of the ecological functions, and the darker areas show areas of the most conflict. The white areas where you're seeing through to the navigational chart drop out entirely because the device suitability doesn't work. And so the lightest pink areas are areas of opportunity, and identify some within the territorial sea, some better opportunities along the south versus the north in this scenario. The second piece I want to introduce is the Bayesian analysis we're doing through a National Oceanographic Partnership Program project that's managed by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and that's the Bayesian analysis for spatial siting. This is incorporating several new tools to try to really manage one of the biggest challenges we saw coming out of the OET effort, which is data gaps and uncertainty about where technology is really headed. And that uncertainty piece has been a critical challenge, especially on the device side in some of the policy conversations, because as a series of managers, we really do not know what the final technologies will look like, what their needs are, what their impacts are. There's some ideas, and I think there's a lot of assumptions about where we'll start, but we don't fully know what that key piece will look like. The goal for the Bayesian analysis project is to produce a web interface tool that allows multiple users to share different perspectives and different views on data to come to sort of a managed group perspective on what the probabilities are for success in sighting devices on the ocean. A quick thing to mention is, what is Bayes? What is Bayesian analysis? In its most basic sense, it's a mathematical theorem to handle conditional probabilities and inverse probabilities. And what I mean by that is, how do we relate a number of uncertain activities or events to come up with a composite probability understanding their likelihood of success or their level of risk? And I'll show a couple of examples here of what that looks like. This is a Bayesian belief network. This is the engine that really does the decision making in the Bayesian tool. And what you're seeing here is a generalized model for a point absorber device off the coast. And each of the nodes that are above here are data input points that have been identified as important to the success of a device. And they aggregate along the way in a couple of cases in order to ask a question about port service and anchoring suitability. And in this case, you'll see these, what you're looking at here on these bars are attributes that have been classified by different data ranges, and then the probability of that being the value for a site. So in this case, all of these boxes have an equal size bar, meaning we don't know what's present in a patch of water, so we'll give an equal chance across all of them. What this tool does then is it allows us to send the GIS data in, and so that gets passed through from ArcGIS to a software package we use for modeling in Bayes, and allows for multiple models to run through and creates an output you see here on the right. The dark blue areas indicating the most valuable areas for development under that model scenario. This next blue shade, an acceptable area, and this lightest blue is sort of a more distant possible area that could be developed, but most likely is a great challenge. And what you then have outside of that, of course, is the areas that are unknown or unable to be developed. To return back to that same model, I want to show this example. One of the real strong points with this Bayesian approach is that we can manage uncertainty in the data. The grayed boxes now have entries in them where I've indicated what the site has for certain attributes. In water depth, we have a 100% certainty that it's a 30 to 40 meter depth, so that passes on its value. But on the other components here, we don't entirely know. We have a sense, and so there's a probability distribution, 50-50 for these depths, or 50-25. So these levels of uncertainty that are in the gray pass along, and we have an understanding then that the site is most likely possible, though there's a 30% chance that it will not work, and a 5% chance that it's a bit better than possible. And so it's with these sorts of tools we're able to manage both uncertainty in the data itself, and we can also create these models across a number of different development scenarios, energy perspectives, and developer perspectives to capture a range of understandings. It's not just for the energy devices that we're also being able to answer some questions. This is an example on the Bayesian work. We're fortunately teaming with Oregon State University, the Nature Conservancy, and robust decisions. Oregon State has brought in an example here of habitat suitability for black rockfish. One of the challenges in the Oregon case is that we have very high quality bathymetry in the territorial sea, 4-meter resolution, and then outside it goes to 50 meter. Combining those in a traditional analysis would create a lot of error, especially where you're matching up that boundary. But in this, the Bayes nodes can pass on those error rates, and depending on where you're at, the distribution expands in the poor quality data and narrows up in the better quality data, and really lets us understand how important finer data is to a final understanding of the species habitat suitability. Back onto the energy example, how we develop these conditional probabilities is without data. We start with basically an expert panel process and ask for each attribute, what do each individual iteration's combination look like? So in this case, you see an example for anchoring. Each line represents a possible scenario we've imagined, and we work through each of those with a series of experts and ask what their responses are, document that, and we can capture either a deterministic single outcome or a probabilistic number of outcomes that can then be passed through the GIS process as we do learn more data. So really this is an evidence-based probability structure. The final tool for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management BAS tool will be a web-enabled decision support piece that will have a front end allowing different inputs and interests to be placed. Will show real-time spatial responses to different values and different concerns about risk across different resources. And for the Bayesian tool, it'll be a 2012 rollout. The Oregon Wave Energy Trust Cumulative Effects Framework, actually we're rolling out next week at the OWET conference here in Portland, Oregon. And so we'll have, for folks that are here for that, we can happily show that. And I'm also happy to take questions after this. Here's our contact information. Feel free to contact myself or Gareth. And again, thanks for the opportunity for this. And just want to note that both these projects were supported by the Oregon Wave Energy Trust and Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Thanks all. And let me pass the control back. Let's see. All right.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Can everyone see the screen?
This is Chris. I can.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just jump right in. Is the side panel here showing? Or is the full screen visible?
That should be full screen on my end.
Okay. Okay, so well, as we've heard today, these MHK devices have the potential for ecological impacts. So there's been some regulatory scrutiny, obviously. Developers are going to have to deal with one of these federal agencies, or perhaps many of them, depending on where the device is sited. And these agencies are charged with ensuring compliance to various federal statutes, the Clean Water Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Coastal Zone Management Act. And this all falls under the umbrella of the National Environmental Policy Act. So MHK devices are going to be, or MHK array projects are going to be implemented under a NEPA framework. And basically the developer is going to have to provide a description of existing resources and some analysis of impacts under different development alternatives. Now, so DOE, in order to help developers in this process, DOE is funding a multi-lab effort to try to look at some of the physical and biological effects of these MHK devices, kind of reduce some of the uncertainty about these devices. Now, different labs have different roles, but Argonne's role in particular is to use some of the field and laboratory data generated by the other labs and put that information into an ecological risk assessment. And we hope that this will aid developers in, by addressing the stakeholder concerns about MHK technologies, so to help them meet the NEPA requirements. So we're using the standard EPA ecological risk assessment framework. It's been around for quite a while. Originally developed for toxicology, but can be applied to multiple things. And there's 3 steps to that: problem formulation, analysis, and risk characterization. And we're in the problem formulation phase. One of the key steps there is to develop conceptual models. And these are basically diagrammatic representations of stressor and receptor linkages. So basically the stressor being the MHK device and its impacts in the environment, and then the receptors being the biota and habitat. So basically these conceptual models identify potential risks, and they do so in a visual manner. I'm going to show you several here in a minute. So it's a very clear visual description of potential environmental risk. So the EPA recommends these because they're excellent communication tools because of their visual clarity. Also, they're useful because they identify data gaps and research needs. Also, these conceptual models show potential effects. So basically, they show risk hypotheses. So in the conceptual models I show in a minute here, just because they're showing a potential effect doesn't mean that effect actually exists. But it is something that could potentially happen, and therefore it has to be addressed. So MHK developers have to consider 2 things. First of all, the incremental increase in impacts from as you move from a single device to a large-scale commercial development, so an MHK array system. And they have to consider the interaction of the MHK device with other anthropogenic stressors. So I'm going to deal with the first one initially. So you see here, for the case of a single MHK device, you can expect that most of the impacts are going to be relatively localized. So localized impacts to event those within the footprint of the device, some localized hydrodynamic changes, and then in turn you're going to have some localized or individual level impacts to the biota. But as you start to add devices, the impact magnitude begins to accumulate. So you could end up seeing potentially some large-scale impacts on benthic habitat, water column processes, physical processes, and then in turn some population-level effects on the biota. So changes in community structure over a larger scale, community interactions and ecosystem processes. So this is a conceptual model showing some of the potential direct effects of an MHK device on biota and habitat. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think we're all pretty familiar with some of these potential impacts. So blade strike, noise, EMF effects from transmission cables, small-scale hydrodynamic alterations. These are all potential effects that are currently being evaluated. And as you add devices, again, these effects, many of them anyway, will potentially accumulate. These effects can increase with MHK arrays. What I'm really going to focus on are more of the complicated habitat-mediated potential impacts. So these are ways that biota can be affected through the environment and through the MHK device acting on the environment. So these conceptual models are basically a synthesis of several recent reviews of MHK technology and their potential ecological effects. We kind of synthesize them all into this general conceptual model. This is applicable to a broad array of MHK devices. You can alter the conceptual model to tailor it to specific devices, specific technologies. This is applicable to wave and technology devices in general. And these have also been reviewed by our management agencies as well, with their inputs have been incorporated. So one potential route is contaminants. We heard that earlier. Anti-fouling coatings potentially can be toxic. Accidental spills, vessel discharges, oils and lubricants from devices. These can contaminate the water and the sediment, and that can result in biotic changes. So we could potentially see a shift to more, say, pollution-tolerant species in the sediment. Now, this isn't going to be significant for some devices. There's varying degrees of potential for contaminant introduction based on technology and siting, but this isn't a concern identified by management agencies that's going to be addressed. Now, another potential effect would be hydrology. These devices obviously are designed to extract energy from water. So with the MHK array system, you could see a reduction in tidal flushing, reduced wave height for a wave device, changes in water circulation along the coast or in an estuary. And these could end up affecting biota in various ways. So, for example, primary producers, your phytoplankton and algae, they often depend on a certain hydrologic regime, or they're adapted to a certain hydrologic regime, so they could be affected by some of these changes. Also, larval egg transport. So larvae and eggs of fish and invertebrates, they rely on coastal currents, river currents, to transport them to their nursery grounds, for example. And that could be affected by some of these hydrologic changes from MHK arrays. Now, with some of these hydrologic changes, you could also see some changes in water quality. So, for example, if you have reduced tidal flushing, you could have potential for hypoxic stress within an estuary, or you could reduce river flow, which could create kind of a dead pool effect in a river. Also, you could reduce the penetration of salt water into an estuary. And these kind of things can, again, affect biota, so you can see a shift to more hypoxic-tolerant species. With the salinity changes, salinity is very important in determining the distribution of fish and invertebrates in estuaries. So if you alter the salinity regime, you could change their animal distributions. Important for egg and larval transport as well. They use these tides, and they use water column stratification to transport themselves to their nursery grounds. Hydrodynamic changes could also alter the sediment potentially. So you could see alteration in sediment transport, and that could change bottom type and grain size over a certain area. And that, again, can affect the biota. Organisms are very dependent or determined by grain size in many cases, and also affect spawning grounds and things like that. In rivers in particular, you could have a debris trapping effect from these device structures as well, and that could change the benthic community. Also, chronic bottom disturbance. So these devices during maintenance, if you have to lift up, say, a turbine from the bottom, it's going to disturb the sediment. Doing this repeatedly represents a chronic disturbance. Also, anchor scour or cable scour from mooring structures associated with a wave device, for example, could also cause chronic disturbance to benthic communities. You can see a shift to more opportunistic organisms. Sediment transport is also a big issue because you're potentially altering habitat. So for coastal birds, for example, if you change sediment transport, the pattern to scour and deposition, you could alter their nesting habitat, for example. And then also the artificial reef effect. If you put MHK arrays into a system, you're going to attract structure-oriented species. So fish, invertebrates, marine mammals, sea turtles. these things are all going to be attracted to these arrays. And so you're going to see potentially a big change in your local community composition, especially if you put these devices in, say, a featureless soft sediment sort of system. The effects won't necessarily be as dramatic if it's in a hard structure or has a lot of hard substrate around it. So this change, this introduction of artificial reef is going to change things like sediment and water biogeochemistry, recruitment patterns, also food web changes. And so this would introduce population level changes into the environment. Some species may benefit from this artificial reef, some species may be hurt by it. It all depends on how it's managed. Overall, the effects are likely to be positive because these could end up being marine reserves, but it sort of depends on the species. And then, of course, within these different feedback, or in these different ecosystem compartments, you have positive and negative feedback, so very complex interactions. They're difficult to quantify numerically, but can be addressed. Hello? Hello?
Mark, I can still hear you.
I just got something saying I was made the presenter. This is Andrea. I don't think so.
Yeah, I have presenter on my screen, but I'm the presenter.
Yeah.
Mark, are you okay?
Hello?
Hello, are you back on yet?
I'm listed as the presenter, but my screen looks kind of truncated. Wait a minute, let me try to pull it back up. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Not sure what happened.
All right, sorry about that.
Okay, so again, complex feedback between the different compartments. So I'm going to just quickly introduce some of the potential for interaction with MHK arrays with existing anthropogenic stressors. So as we heard with the cadastre issues, there's a lot of existing human use in the marine or the aquatic environment, and a lot of existing stressors. So benthic disturbance from dredging operations, pipeline trenching operations, pollution, fishing pressure, underwater construction activities, shipping noise, vessel traffic, lots of noise from sonar and vessel traffic as well. And MHK devices produce some of these, some similar impacts, similar in kind, not necessarily in magnitude, but similar in kind. So they can kind of be viewed as a cumulative, potential for cumulative stressors. Now at this point, there's not a lot of information on the magnitude of ecological impacts from MHK technologies. So how much do these MHK technologies actually add to the noise environment? It's not necessarily known. It's thought to be relatively low, but more data is needed. Also, the cumulative impacts can be difficult to assess because the resources and the potential impacts vary by technology and project location. So there's no one-size-fits-all. And also the interaction of MHK technology with the existing stressors isn't well understood. Usually these interactions are described in terms of additive, synergistic, or offsetting. So for example, an additive effect would just be an incremental increase in, say, bottom disturbance. You can add the disturbance from an MHK device to the bottom to the existing bottom disturbances in the area. And that's, I think, going to be most of the impacts of MHK devices are going to be sort of additive, small incremental increases. But some of the impacts could be synergistic, especially when you're dealing with endangered species, for example. So in that case, even if it's just a few, even if there's a small increase in a stressor, that could significantly affect the population of endangered species because they're sort of living just at their capacity for reproduction and propagation. You could potentially see some synergistic effects there. Now next we're going to move on to the analysis phase of the EPA risk assessment, and there's two parts to that, characterization of exposure. And the first part of that is determining the spatial and temporal extent of the stressors identified in the conceptual model. So what's the extent of the EMF field or the noise field? And that work's being done by the other labs. They're looking at, say, the hydrodynamic influence of these devices and how big that is, how much area of grain size could be changed and what sort of magnitude. EMF fields. They're looking at all those sorts of issues. And there's also some data available in the existing literature. And then we're looking at the second part of it, which is determining the contact with ecological receptors. And you determine the contact based on the species life history and ecology. And you can look at that, do that analysis quantitatively or qualitatively. Right now we're looking at some quantitative approaches, so modeling animal movement to see whether there's actually much of a probability of animals interacting with these devices. Also, you can model noise and EMF fields and see whether there's, using the animal movement data, see whether they're actually going to be exposed to a stressing noise environment or an EMF field. And doing this in a GIS-based platform. As far as the toxin questions, there are several existing probabilistic exposure models, and these have advantages over traditional exposure models because they provide a more realistic exposure. So they take into account the animal's habitat preferences, its seasonal distribution to see, give a more realistic exposure profile. So we can use all these to address some of these potential stressor issues. And then risk characterizations as well. That's basically just quality assurance of your data sources. And so basically you use the, in the analysis phase, you determine what the potential ecological effects are based on the level of exposure and the receptors present. So once you do this analysis, you can go back to your initial conceptual model and start to examine these linkages and see which ones are actually real, which ones are actually significant. So for example, if you determine that based on modeling and field validation, there's a very little hydrodynamic impact from these MHK arrays, then you could remove that from your conceptual model and its associated impacts. If you determine there's very little potential for contaminants introduction to the environment and artificial reefs are not going to be significant detriment to the environment, then you can remove those from your analysis or from your conceptual model. So basically the EPA recommends these because they can constantly be modified based on new information. So at this time, I'd like to acknowledge our funding from the Department of Energy and our work with our lab partners at Sandia, PNNL, and Oak Ridge National Lab. And I'll turn it back over to Anna. Okay, Anna?
All right, thanks very much, Mark. Can you all see my screen okay?
Great.
I can see.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say again, apologies for our technical difficulties today, and thank you very, very much to all of our presenters. This last slide that I have to close is just to show that the presentations that we had today, the projects that were presented on, are by no means a comprehensive list of the research efforts that have gone on in this arena. And this is a list of some other projects in the same category. And in order to meet our goals with this webinar to increase collaboration with everyone, if you do have any suggestions on projects that we can add, projects that you know fit in this category that we can add to our list, please contact me. My email address is right there. And this webinar has also been recorded, and we will be able to make it available on the TEFAS website. Also, the presentations that you saw today will also be available to you on that site. So again, thanks for joining us today. Will anyone that is able to stay on the line and has a question, you can send those to me via the chat or question box. And I have been sending your questions along to the presenters that you've asked the question of. So whoever can stay on will stay on and continue with the questions. And thank you again for joining us today.
Anna, are you asking for verbal questions or just for virtual ones?
I think because we have so many people on the line, I think verbally it's going to be a little bit difficult. But I can stay on the line and continue to pass questions on virtually to all of the presenters if you're available. I know it's already running late. Otherwise, email questions to me or the presenters, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
It might be good to just let the listeners know that, just in case they're thinking that they can ask questions rather than just post them.